The air was thick with tension as the first-class cabin of the flight from New York to Los Angeles hummed with the quiet sounds of luxury. Passengers settled into their plush leather seats, clinking champagne glasses and flipping through the latest magazines. Among them, Rick Turner, a man in his late 30s, adjusted his tie with a sense of pride. This was his usual routine, catching a flight for business, always looking polished, always in control. But today was different. Today, something was about to happen that would alter the course of his life forever. Rick had always prided himself on being the kind of person who never held back his opinions, especially about those he felt were living in their own bubble of wealth and privilege. He glanced around the cabin, the rich and famous seated all around him, but his eyes lingered on a man across the aisle. The man had a slight resemblance to someone Rick had seen in the news, someone he had no respect for. "Yeah, that's definitely him," Rick muttered under his breath, assuming he was looking at a man who could only be described as a tech billionaire, the kind of person who, in Rick's eyes, was too detached from reality to understand the struggles of everyday people. The man was wearing a simple black t-shirt, looking out the window, his face calm and unbothered. He wasn't drawing attention to himself, but Rick couldn't resist. Must be nice to have billions and just sit around doing nothing but building electric cars and dreaming about going to Mars, Rick said loudly enough for the people around him to hear, sneering at the thought of someone who had so much while others had so little. He didn't even notice the way the conversation around him faltered. Another passenger sitting next to Rick, a woman in her 40s, raised an eyebrow at him but didn't say anything. Rick, feeling emboldened by the uncomfortable silence that followed his comment, leaned back in his seat with a smirk. "Yeah, this whole save the planet thing is such a joke," he added, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Those guys think they're changing the world, but they're just cashing in on people's ignorance." The cabin was quiet now, and Rick could feel a few pairs of eyes glancing his way. He could practically hear the gears in their heads turning, thinking about the man he was insulting, but he didn't care. Who could he possibly be talking about? The world was full of people like him, rich, entitled, and out of touch. He was just saying what everyone else was probably thinking. The man across from him didn't react. He didn't seem fazed at all by Rick's insults. Instead, he simply took a deep breath and turned his attention back to the window. What Rick didn't know, however, was that this was not just any tech billionaire. This man was Elon Musk, one of the most influential people in the world, the CEO of Tesla and SpaceX, a man whose ambition to revolutionize transportation, energy, and even space exploration had already changed the world in ways Rick could never imagine. But at that moment, Rick had no idea. Rick's words hung in the air like a cloud, the silence in the cabin stretching a bit too long. It wasn't until a voice cut through the tension that Rick realized just how wrong he was. "Excuse me," the man across the aisle said, his voice calm and steady. Rick glanced over, eyes narrowing in surprise as the figure before him revealed his true identity. "You really don't know who you're talking to, do you?" Elon Musk asked, the corner of his mouth lifting in a faint smile that Rick couldn't quite read. Rick froze. His heart skipped a beat. It couldn't be. The man he had just insulted was Elon Musk. The silence in the cabin deepened. Rick's face flushed red as the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He stammered, trying to salvage some semblance of dignity. "Wait, you're him," he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. The cabin felt even more suffocating now, as the weight of the moment settled over him. "Yeah, I guess I am," Elon said, his smile still faint but now tinged with amusement. "And I've heard worse." Rick didn't know what to say. His mind raced, trying to grasp the situation, but the words didn't come. How could he have been so blind? How could he have insulted the man who, with his work, was actively shaping the future of humanity? And now, here he was, seated just a few feet away, his entire view of the world turned upside down. Elon leaned forward slightly, as if to drive the point home. "Maybe next time, think before you speak," he added, his tone matter-of-fact but not unkind. "You'd be surprised how much people like me actually do to help make the world a better place." Rick's mind was spinning. He couldn't fathom the turn his day had just taken, but it was too late to take back what he had said. The damage was done. As the flight continued its journey through the sky, Rick was left to stew in his own embarrassment. The world seemed a little smaller now, the walls of the luxurious cabin closing in around him. Every glance from the other passengers felt like judgment, each moment a reminder of the words he could never undo. And in that moment, Rick realized that he had made an enemy of one of the most powerful men on the planet. Not through anything personal, but simply because he hadn't understood who he was talking to. It was a lesson he would not soon forget. This was just the beginning of a story that would force Rick to confront his own assumptions, his biases, and perhaps even the way he viewed success itself. And as the plane sailed toward Los Angeles, Rick's thoughts were consumed with the question, how could he have been so wrong? Rick Turner wasn't the kind of guy who let his emotions get the better of him. At least, that's what he liked to tell himself. He worked in finance, a mid-level executive at a small but promising firm. On paper, his life seemed fine. Steady job, decent salary, a modest apartment in Manhattan. But there was always this nagging feeling that he was meant for more. It wasn't that he lacked ambition. Rather, he lacked the kind of success that made people look at him with awe. Unlike the millionaires and billionaires he often heard about in the media, Rick wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth. His parents were both hard-working middle-class folks who believed in earning every penny and working long hours. His father, a small-time mechanic, and his mother, a high school teacher, taught him the value of a dollar, of putting in the hours and grinding away to get by. But, despite their best efforts, Rick never quite bought into the idea that hard work alone could make someone truly successful. He had always envied those who seemed to have it all figured out, the rich, the famous, the innovators. They made millions without breaking a sweat, or so it seemed. And then there was the tech world, the so-called disruptors who were changing the world with their ideas, their investments, their genius. Elon Musk was at the top of that list. Rick's problem wasn't so much with Musk's accomplishments. It was with what Rick saw as the arrogance that came with it. To Rick, Musk represented everything that was wrong with the world. People who could waltz into a room, throw their money around, and change things just because they had the power to do so. People like Musk, who had an idea for electric cars, and suddenly everyone was talking about how he was saving the planet. Rick had never bought into that narrative. To him, Musk was just another rich guy selling a fantasy, convincing the masses that they were somehow going to change the world by buying a car that ran on electricity instead of gas. But Rick's cynicism wasn't just directed at Musk. It extended to everyone who made their living in tech, Silicon Valley billionaires, social media moguls, venture capitalists. Rick resented the way they lived in a bubble, isolated from the everyday struggles of the average person. To him, they weren't heroes. They were self-absorbed elites who didn't have a clue about the real world. They lived in their mansions, threw extravagant parties, and bought and sold companies while the rest of the world was just trying to make rent. Despite this, Rick had always secretly fantasized about what it would be like to be in that world. He imagined what it would feel like to have unlimited power and wealth. Maybe, just maybe, if he had a chance, he could prove he was as smart as any of them. He'd show everyone that success wasn't just about who you knew. It was about being in the right place at the right time. He had the skills. He just needed the break. But now, that break might have come in the most unexpected way. The man he had just insulted, Elon Musk, was the embodiment of everything Rick had dismissed, everything he had thought was out of reach. He was the epitome of Silicon Valley success. And Rick, in his arrogance, had just torn him down in front of a plane full of people. As the reality of the situation sank in, Rick found himself battling a wave of conflicting emotions. The first was disbelief. How could he have not recognized Musk? It was as if everything he had thought he knew about the world had been turned upside down in an instant. The next was humiliation. He made a fool of himself in front of not just Musk, but everyone around him. He thought back to his words, the sarcasm, the dismissive tone, and winced. But underneath it all, there was a feeling that Rick couldn't quite place, a twinge of respect. He had insulted someone whose work had actually made a difference in the world, whether Rick liked it or not. He'd mocked a man whose name was synonymous with ambition, innovation, and success. And now that man was sitting just a few feet away, letting Rick stew in his own embarrassment. Rick stared out the window as the flight continued its course. He could feel the weight of his actions pressing down on him. The once comfortable distance between him and Elon Musk had vanished. There was no denying it now. He had insulted one of the most influential people in the world, and there was no easy way to undo it. He had always thought people like Musk were a joke, that their wealth and power came from some kind of lucky break or sheer luck. But the more Rick thought about it, the more he realized how wrong he had been. Musk hadn't just lucked into success. He had earned it. He had changed the game, redefined industries, and turned science fiction into reality. And Rick, who had spent years criticizing that very kind of success, had just shot himself in the foot. Think before you speak. Elon's words echoed in Rick's mind. It felt like a punch to the gut, a reminder that maybe, just maybe, he had underestimated the kind of person Musk truly was. Rick had always been quick to judge, quick to dismiss people who didn't fit into his narrow worldview. But now, sitting on this plane, staring at the man he had so carelessly insulted, Rick realized that his world was much smaller than he had ever imagined. For the first time in a long time, Rick wasn't sure of anything. He wasn't sure about the world of wealth and privilege that he had always resented. He wasn't sure about the way he had lived his life, constantly chasing the wrong dreams and judging those who seemed to have it all. And most of all, he wasn't sure about his own place in the world anymore. He wasn't just an outsider looking in anymore. He had become a part of the story, and it was a story he never thought he'd be caught in. The rest of the flight passed in a blur for Rick. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. How had he allowed himself to be so careless? He kept replaying the moment in his head. His condescending remarks, the dismissive tone, and the look on Elon Musk's face when he spoke. There was a slight amusement in Musk's expression, but there was also something else. A quiet, unspoken challenge. It felt like a test Rick hadn't studied for. Rick kept his eyes forward, avoiding any unnecessary conversation with the other passengers. He wasn't ready to face them. How could he? They had all heard him insult one of the most famous men on the planet. They'd heard him mock the very thing that had given Musk his billions, his vision, his risk-taking, his ability to change the course of industries. It wasn't just a flippant comment anymore. It was a mistake that Rick could never take back. The cabin began to clear as the flight neared its destination. Passengers began to gather their belongings, but Rick stayed put, staring out the window, his thoughts a tangled mess. He hadn't even noticed when Musk got up and began to exit the plane. He only became aware when the door to the cockpit opened and a flight attendant walked past him, giving him an apologetic glance. "Mr. Turner, your luggage will be ready soon," the attendant said, her voice soft but businesslike. She had been polite enough, but there was a subtle shift in her demeanor that made Rick feel even more isolated. "Thanks," Rick muttered, trying to shake the fog from his brain. But as he stood up and stretched his legs, he noticed something that made his stomach drop. There, near the exit, was Elon Musk, chatting with a few fellow first-class passengers. They were all laughing, clearly at ease, while Rick stood frozen in place, too embarrassed to approach. His chest tightened. He had never been the type to back down from a confrontation, but now, the thought of facing Musk again felt unbearable. What could he possibly say? "Sorry, I didn't realize you were a billionaire tech genius?" That felt weak, even to him. He had insulted a man who had likely faced far worse in his career, but it didn't change the fact that Rick had still gone too far. As Rick gathered his things and prepared to leave the plane, he caught a glimpse of Musk one last time. This time, there was no smile, no challenge, just a calm, calculating look. Musk's eyes met Rick's, and for a split second, Rick thought he saw a flicker of something, perhaps disappointment or maybe amusement. But whatever it was, it sent a shiver down his spine. Rick stepped off the plane and into the terminal, his thoughts still whirling. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out to see several messages from his colleagues. They were about the business deal he had been flying out to discuss in Los Angeles. But Rick couldn't bring himself to focus on work. The incident with Musk had taken up every ounce of his mental energy, and now, he couldn't shake the feeling that his entire worldview had been cracked open. As he walked toward baggage claim, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from a friend he hadn't spoken to in years, Paul, a former college roommate who had always been a bit of a tech enthusiast. "Paul, did you just insult Elon Musk on a flight? I saw the footage on Twitter. Dude, what were you thinking? Rick's stomach dropped. He stared at the message, then scrolled through his feed to find the video Paul was referring to. It was a short clip, taken from someone sitting behind him, where Rick could be seen mocking Musk in all his arrogant glory. The video had been shared hundreds of times in just a few hours. People were tagging Musk in the comments, laughing at Rick's expense, and some were even calling him out for his ignorance. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Rick, it wasn't meant like that. I didn't know it was him. Paul, yeah, well, it's him all right. You're trending, my friend. Rick put his phone away, feeling the weight of his embarrassment settling in. He couldn't believe it. In a matter of hours, he had become a viral joke, a cautionary tale of what happens when you speak without thinking. His mind raced again. He had spent years mocking people like Musk, dismissing them as lucky, privileged individuals who got to play with other people's futures. But now, here he was, being ridiculed by the very people he had once laughed at. And yet, despite all the ridicule, something in Rick's mind began to shift. He had always believed that the system was rigged, that those at the top were simply lucky or born into privilege. He had never considered that someone like Musk might have worked relentlessly to build his empire, might have taken risks that Rick couldn't even comprehend. There was a sudden curiosity, no, a hunger, to know more about the man he had so carelessly insulted. As Rick grabbed his suitcase from the conveyor belt, he felt a new, uncomfortable sensation creeping in: respect. He couldn't deny that Musk had done something extraordinary with his life. He had changed the way people thought about electric cars, about space, about the future. Even if Rick still didn't fully agree with everything Musk did, he had to admit that Musk had built something real, something that had made an impact. But that respect also brought with it a realization, something that Rick had long avoided confronting. Musk was no longer just a figure to criticize from the sidelines. He was a force, a man who had accomplished more than Rick could even imagine. And Rick? Well, he had done nothing but mock him. The conflict inside Rick grew. Part of him still wanted to hold on to his cynicism, his belief that people like Musk were out of touch with the real world. But another part of him knew that to grow, he would have to confront those assumptions, confront his own limitations. And it wasn't just Musk he had to face. It was himself. As Rick left the terminal, he made a silent vow to himself. He would figure this out. He would learn. He had no idea where this would lead, but he knew one thing for certain. He had just crossed a line, and now there was no going back. The days after the flight were a blur for Rick. He had barely been able to focus on work, his mind constantly replaying the events of that day, unable to shake the embarrassment that followed him wherever he went. He tried to drown out the noise with the usual distractions, emails, meetings, even grabbing a drink with some old colleagues. But nothing could quiet the nagging feeling in the back of his mind. Rick was no stranger to failure. He had stumbled through several bad business deals in his career, had been passed over for promotions, and had experienced his fair share of rejection. But none of those failures had felt as personal as this. He had insulted Elon Musk, and the world had seen it. The viral video continued to circulate, and with each new comment or meme, Rick felt his reputation sink lower. He tried to convince himself it wasn't a big deal. After all, he was just another guy in a crowded city, living a normal life. But the more he thought about it, the more it gnawed at him. This was different. This was about more than just being embarrassed. It was about realizing that the things he had dismissed, things like ambition, vision, and risk, were qualities that Rick himself lacked. It wasn't until late one evening, when Rick was hunched over his laptop trying to make sense of the growing fallout, that he received a message that made him freeze. The notification popped up on his screen, and for a moment, Rick wasn't sure if he was seeing things. Elon Musk, Rick, I've been thinking about our conversation. We should talk. You've got a lot to learn, and I'm willing to help you understand why you were wrong. Rick stared at the screen. His pulse quickened, and his first instinct was to assume it was some sort of joke. He checked the sender's profile to confirm it was really Elon Musk's verified account. It was. The name was there, the blue checkmark, and the message itself seemed real. It took a few moments for Rick to gather himself. The man he had insulted, the man who had every reason to ignore or mock him in return, had reached out. Why? Was this some kind of power move? Was Elon trying to make a point? Or was there something deeper behind it? Before he could overthink it further, Rick quickly typed a response. Rick, I don't even know what to say. I was out of line, and I realize that now. I didn't mean to disrespect you or your work. I'm sorry. He hit send and waited, unsure of what to expect. Would Musk respond with a simple dismissal? Would he ridicule Rick like the internet had? It felt surreal, as though he was in a dream where the rules of the universe were turned upside down. A few minutes later, Elon replied, Elon Musk, it's not about respect. It's about understanding. I've been where you are, Rick. I used to be that guy, too, judging people based on what I thought I knew. Let me help you see things from a different perspective. Rick's heart pounded in his chest. The sincerity of the message was impossible to ignore. He had expected some sort of reprimand, but instead, Elon seemed understanding, almost compassionate. It didn't make sense. Why would someone like him, someone who had achieved so much, take the time to reach out to someone like Rick? Rick, I don't know what to say. I've spent so much of my life looking down on people like you, and now I see how wrong I was. I don't even know where to begin, but if you really think you can help me understand, I'm willing to listen. He hit send, and again, he waited. The minutes dragged by, each second filled with a mix of anticipation and disbelief. But this time, the reply came much faster. Elon Musk, meet me tomorrow at Tesla's headquarters in Palo Alto. We'll talk. No cameras. No media. Just a conversation. Rick read the message twice. Palo Alto. Tesla. This was no joke. He had been invited to meet with Elon Musk, one of the richest, most influential men on the planet. Rick leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Was this an opportunity? Or was it another trick, a way for Musk to further expose Rick for the fool he had made of himself? He thought about it for a long time, staring at the blinking cursor on his screen. On one hand, this could be his chance to learn something real, something that could help him get out of the rut he had been stuck in for so long. On the other hand, it could just be another way for Musk to assert his dominance, to prove how out of touch Rick was with the reality of success. Rick had never been one to shy away from a challenge, and deep down, he knew he couldn't pass this up. This was a rare opportunity, a chance to meet face-to-face with someone who had built an empire and reshaped industries, the kind of person Rick had spent so long criticizing. The next morning, Rick found himself at the airport, ticket in hand, headed to California. His mind was still racing. He didn't know what he would find at Tesla's headquarters, or if this meeting would change anything at all. But one thing was certain. Rick Turner's life was about to take a turn he never expected. As he boarded the plane, the tension that had been gnawing at him for days slowly began to shift. This was more than just a meeting. It was a turning point, a chance to face the truth, learn from it, and maybe, just maybe, finally understand what had eluded him for so long. And as the plane soared toward Palo Alto, Rick couldn't help but feel a strange mix of excitement and fear. The truth, he was beginning to realize, was a powerful thing. And whatever happened next, he was finally ready to face it. Rick's flight to California was a blur of nervous energy and rapid thoughts. As the plane ascended, he sat back in his seat, feeling both excited and uncertain. He had never imagined this day would come, standing in the presence of Elon Musk, let alone being invited to his company's headquarters. The opportunity felt surreal, like he was about to enter a new world entirely. He couldn't stop thinking about the message Elon had sent. It wasn't just an apology or a polite attempt to end the awkward situation. No, it was a genuine offer to help, an invitation to rethink everything Rick had ever believed about ambition, success, and how people like Musk achieved greatness. As the plane touched down in Palo Alto, Rick felt the weight of the moment hit him harder than ever. He was about to meet the man who had shaped industries, the man who had been a symbol of everything Rick had resented. And yet, here he was, about to engage in a conversation with him, a conversation that could change everything. Rick's cab ride to Tesla's headquarters felt endless. His eyes kept darting to the streets outside the window, watching the world blur by. But inside, his mind was focused entirely on the meeting ahead. What would Musk say? What kind of person would he be in person, away from the public eye? The Tesla headquarters appeared before him suddenly, a sleek, modern building that seemed to embody the cutting-edge technology and vision Musk had cultivated. He stepped out of the cab, still unsure of what to expect. His hands were slightly clammy as he walked toward the entrance. As he approached the building, he could see a few Tesla employees standing outside, chatting in small groups. They seemed so calm, so composed, and Rick couldn't help but feel out of place in comparison. He was just a guy from the finance world, someone who had always looked at tech innovators like Musk with a sense of skepticism. "Mr. Turner," a voice called out from behind him. Rick turned to see a tall man in a sharp suit, his demeanor professional yet friendly. He had the kind of look that suggested he was a part of Musk's inner circle. "Mr. Musk is expecting you," the man said, gesturing for Rick to follow. "Please, this way." Rick nodded, trying to steady his nerves. He followed the man inside, through a sleek, minimalistic lobby that looked more like a high-end art gallery than a corporate headquarters. The walls were lined with photographs of Tesla's latest innovations, each one showcasing the company's journey from electric vehicles to space exploration. As they walked down a corridor, Rick noticed that there was an air of quiet confidence about the place. Everything seemed meticulously designed, efficient. He could feel the energy in the building. These were people who were working on something bigger than themselves. They weren't just making products. They were changing the world. Finally, they arrived at a door at the end of the hall. The man in the suit knocked softly before opening it. "Elon, Mr. Turner is here," the man said, stepping aside to let Rick enter. Rick stepped into the room and immediately spotted Elon Musk standing by a large desk, surrounded by sleek gadgets and architectural models of upcoming Tesla projects. Musk's presence was just as powerful in person as it was online. He was taller than Rick had imagined, with a calm confidence that was immediately apparent. He turned to face Rick, offering a small but genuine smile. "Rick, good to meet you in person," Musk said, extending his hand. Rick shook it, feeling the weight of the moment. He had never been more aware of the gap between his own life and Musk's. This wasn't just a handshake. This was the beginning of a conversation that could reshape everything. "Thanks for agreeing to meet with me," Rick said, his voice slightly shaky despite his best efforts to remain composed. Musk smiled again, motioning for Rick to sit down. "It's my pleasure. I understand you've had some thoughts about my work," he said, his tone light but with a hint of curiosity. Rick hesitated for a moment before speaking. I've been pretty critical of your approach in the past. Your vision, your methods, I didn't always see eye to eye with them." Musk nodded, not at all surprised. "I'm used to criticism. It's part of the territory when you're trying to change things. But I also believe that criticism, when it's well-informed, can be valuable. I want you to understand that the way I see the world, the way I operate, isn't something I expect everyone to get. It's a vision that's been built over years, and it's taken a lot of mistakes, a lot of risks, to get here." Rick listened intently, his skepticism slowly beginning to dissolve. Musk's words were not what he expected. There was no arrogance, no sense of superiority. Instead, there was a grounded understanding of how difficult success truly was. For the first time, Rick felt as though he was hearing from someone who genuinely cared about changing the world, not just selling a product. "I'm here because I want you to see something you might not have considered before," Musk continued. "It's not about luck. It's about having a purpose that drives you, even when everyone else doubts you. The vision, the mission, those things have to be bigger than the challenges that come your way." Rick shifted in his seat, processing what Musk had said. He had always dismissed these ideas, thinking they were just the ramblings of people who had it easy. But now, sitting here in this room, surrounded by the tangible results of Musk's work, Rick could no longer deny the depth of the man's dedication. "So, you're telling me it's not just about the tech?" Rick asked, more intrigued than ever. Musk smiled slightly. "Exactly. It's about solving problems that matter. The technology is just the tool. The real work is figuring out what needs to change and how you're going to make that change happen. Whether it's with a car, a rocket, or even just the way we live our everyday lives." Rick sat back, taking it all in. For the first time in a long time, he felt a shift inside himself. The cynicism that had always defined his worldview was starting to crack, and in its place was a budding curiosity. A curiosity about something bigger than just business. Something bigger than himself. But as Musk spoke about the mission, the vision, and the work that lay ahead, Rick also realized something else. This wasn't just about listening. It was about action. And if he wanted to change his life, he would need to start making decisions that reflected that change. Rick wasn't just facing a man he had insulted on a plane. He was facing the possibility of a new future. The conversation with Elon Musk had taken an unexpected turn. What Rick had expected to be a simple, perhaps even awkward, apology session had transformed into something much deeper. Musk wasn't just trying to teach him about the electric car revolution, the future of space exploration, or even his success with Tesla. No, what Musk was offering was something much more profound. An insight into the mindset that allowed him to take risks, defy odds, and achieve what most people could only dream of. After they had settled in, Musk motioned to a table near the window. There, a small group of Tesla engineers were quietly discussing a set of blueprints. Musk leaned back in his chair, studying Rick carefully as if deciding how best to explain his point. "There's a misconception about success," Musk said, his voice calm and deliberate. "Most people think it's about getting everything right from the start. That if you just make the right decisions, success will come easily. But that's not true. The truth is, success is built on failure. And how you handle failure is what separates the people who change the world from those who simply get by." Rick's mind raced. He had heard similar things before, but coming from Musk, it felt different. It wasn't just motivational fluff. It was grounded in the realities of someone who had been knocked down and gotten back up more times than Rick could count. "You've made mistakes?" Rick asked, almost incredulously. Musk chuckled softly. "Many. More than most people could ever imagine. But here's the thing. With every mistake, I learned something new. And with each lesson, I got closer to making the world a better place. You don't get to where I am by avoiding failure. You get there by embracing it, learning from it, and continuing forward." Rick nodded, his thoughts swirling. It wasn't just about money or fame or achieving something big. It was about the process, the growth, and the lessons you picked up along the way. "But that doesn't mean failure is easy," Musk continued. "It's painful. It's discouraging. There are days when you feel like you've hit a wall, and you'll never get past it. But that's the test. Can you keep going even when you feel like everything is falling apart? That's the key to success. Not avoiding failure, but learning to rise from it." Rick sat up straighter, the weight of Musk's words beginning to sink in. This wasn't a man who simply floated through life on easy street. He wasn't some tech mogul who had it all handed to him. Musk had endured years of criticism, skepticism, and downright failure. And yet, here he was, one of the most influential people on the planet, reshaping industries, going to space, changing the way people lived. It wasn't just about brilliance or luck. It was about resilience, grit, and a relentless commitment to his vision. "So, what's the first step?" Rick asked, his voice quieter now, almost unsure. Musk looked at him thoughtfully. "The first step is realizing that you're capable of more than you think. You've been living your life based on what's comfortable, what's familiar. You've played it safe. But the real growth comes when you step out of your comfort zone and take a chance." Rick absorbed the words. He had spent so many years focusing on avoiding risks, sticking to the safe route, the predictable path. It had worked to a certain extent. He had a steady career, a nice apartment, a comfortable lifestyle. But that comfort had come at the cost of true fulfillment, true growth. Musk stood up and walked over to a nearby whiteboard, grabbing a marker. "Let me show you something," he said, drawing a simple diagram. He started by drawing 2 points, one at the top and one at the bottom. "Most people live like this," he said, pointing to the line connecting the 2 points. "They stay on a straight path, they follow a safe trajectory, and they do everything they can to avoid the dips, the valleys. But the thing is, when you try to avoid failure, you also avoid growth. You never get to the peaks because you're afraid of the valleys." Musk then drew a squiggly line, rising and falling in sharp curves. "This is what success really looks like. It's messy. It's unpredictable, but it's also where the most growth happens. The key is learning to navigate the dips, to embrace the uncertainty, and to keep going even when it feels like everything's falling apart. That's how you get to the top. Rick stared at the diagram for a moment, absorbing the meaning behind it. For the first time, he understood that the path to success wasn't about avoiding the tough times or trying to stay in control of everything. It was about accepting that the tough times were inevitable and learning to rise from them. This is what you've done, isn't it? Rick said softly, looking up at Musk. Musk nodded. Exactly. I failed countless times. But each time I failed, I learned. And each time, I got stronger, clearer on my mission. And that's how I ended up where I am today. Rick felt a strange combination of awe and disbelief. He had spent so many years living a life that avoided the risks Musk had embraced. He had avoided taking chances, kept his decisions safe and calculated. But now, in this room, he was learning from a man who had built his empire on exactly the opposite principle. He felt a flicker of excitement inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Could he change? Could he start taking the risks Musk was talking about? Could he finally step out of his comfort zone? The thought both terrified and exhilarated him. Musk smiled at Rick, sensing the shift in his mindset. You've already taken the first step, Rick. You've admitted that you're wrong, that there's more to learn. The next step is putting that into practice. You have the potential, but you've got to be willing to take the leap. Rick took a deep breath, feeling a mix of fear and anticipation. He had no idea where this would lead, but for the first time in a long time, he was ready to face it head-on. Rick had never been the type to embrace the unknown. In fact, he had spent most of his life avoiding it. His career had been built on calculated decisions, measured risks, and a steady progression up the corporate ladder. It was predictable, comfortable, and, at least on the surface, successful. But as he sat in Elon Musk's office, listening to the visionary talk about embracing failure and navigating uncertainty, Rick felt a deep, unsettling truth rising within him. He had been playing it safe. For years, he had been living in a self-imposed bubble of comfort, avoiding the very things that might have led him to growth. Now, with Musk's words echoing in his head, he couldn't deny it any longer. It was time for a change. So, what's next? Rick asked, his voice tinged with both curiosity and apprehension. He was ready to move forward, but the uncertainty of what that would look like was still overwhelming. Musk looked at him with a thoughtful expression. Next? You start by doing something different. Take a risk. You don't need to change your entire life overnight, but you need to challenge yourself in a way you never have before. Rick nodded slowly, his mind racing. What did that look like? What kind of risk could he take? He had no intentions of abandoning his career or personal life, but there had to be something he could do that pushed him beyond the comfort zone. Here's the thing, Musk continued, walking over to a small shelf where a few objects were displayed. He grabbed a sleek, futuristic-looking model of a Tesla vehicle. People like us don't create the future by staying in the past. You have to think about what's next, not just for your career, but for yourself. What's the bigger picture? Rick stared at the model in Musk's hand, the sleek lines of the car a symbol of innovation. He had been skeptical of Tesla at first, dismissing the company as just another overhyped tech startup. But looking at the car now, he realized it was so much more than that. It wasn't just a car. It was a piece of the future, a glimpse into a world that didn't yet exist, but one Musk was relentlessly building. Do you ever get scared? Rick asked, almost without thinking. I mean, you've taken some huge risks. Every time you've gone all in on something, you've been betting on an uncertain future. Doesn't that terrify you? Musk's gaze softened, and he set the model back down on the shelf. Fear is normal. Everyone has it. But here's the difference. I don't let it control me. Fear can either paralyze you or propel you forward. The trick is in choosing which one it will be. Rick was silent for a moment, processing what Musk had said. The idea of embracing fear, of letting it fuel his actions rather than hold him back, was both exhilarating and terrifying. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized it made sense. All those years of avoiding discomfort, avoiding failure, had kept him stuck in place. He had never truly allowed himself to grow. Musk's voice broke through his thoughts. So here's what I want you to do, Rick. When you leave here today, don't go back to your old ways. Don't fall into the same routine. Find something that scares you, something that challenges you, and do it. Take a risk. Trust yourself. Rick stood up, feeling a surge of determination and fear at the same time. It was as if a switch had been flipped inside him. He had never been one to back away from a challenge, but this was different. It wasn't just about career moves or business deals. It was about personal growth, about breaking free from the cage he had built around himself. I will, Rick said, his voice firm. I don't know what it's going to be yet, but I'm going to find that risk. Musk smiled, the kind of smile that suggested he knew exactly what was going through Rick's mind. Good. It's not going to be easy, but it'll be worth it. As Rick walked out of Tesla's headquarters, the weight of the conversation settled in. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was stepping into something bigger than himself. The road ahead was uncertain, but it didn't seem as daunting as it had before. Musk had shown him that uncertainty wasn't something to be feared. It was something to be embraced. Rick's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, expecting a text from work or some update on his usual routine, but instead, it was a notification from the video he had posted years ago, the one where he had insulted Musk on the plane. The views were still climbing. The comments were still coming in. Some were kind, others mocking, but one caught his eye. Comment: You should really think about how you treat people. You have no idea who you're talking to until it's too late. Rick felt a pang of guilt as he read it. That comment, along with the thousands of others, had shaped his perception of who he was. The man in that viral video wasn't the person he was now. That was a version of Rick stuck in the past, afraid, cynical, and unwilling to look beyond the surface. But now, with Musk's words fresh in his mind, Rick knew he had the power to change. He didn't have to be defined by that moment. The person he had been was not the person he was becoming. It was time to take the first step. Rick's mind was spinning as he left Tesla's headquarters. He had learned more in the past few hours than he had in the last few years of his life. Musk's words still echoed in his ears, stirring something deep within him, a mix of excitement and fear. The comfort zone he had lived in for so long was starting to feel suffocating, and for the first time, he wanted more. But what was that more? What risk could he take? He wandered the streets of Palo Alto, trying to clear his head. He'd always prided himself on making calculated decisions, analyzing every potential outcome before committing to anything. But Musk had made him realize that sometimes it wasn't about the analysis. It was about the leap of faith. As he passed a cafe, he paused. The familiar hum of conversations, the smell of fresh coffee, the comfortable atmosphere. It all seemed so different now. This was where he had spent countless hours in his old routine, comfortably observing the world, never truly engaging. Now, that world seemed static. How could he keep going in circles like this, knowing there was something more waiting for him outside? Rick pulled out his phone again and glanced at his social media feed. His viral video, the one where he had insulted Musk, was still trending, with new comments pouring in by the minute. His notifications buzzed incessantly, each one a reminder of the past version of himself he was trying to leave behind. Then, one particular comment stood out. You owe Elon Musk an apology, not just for what you said, but for who you were. Rick's throat tightened. He had read hundreds of comments like this before, but today, it hit harder. He had told himself over and over again that the man in the video didn't matter, that he didn't owe anyone anything. But now, after meeting Musk, after hearing his thoughts on failure, ambition, and vision, Rick realized the weight of those words. He owed Musk an apology. It wasn't just about the insult he had hurled during their first encounter. It was about everything that had followed. The dismissive attitude, the arrogance, the assumption that people like Musk were just lucky. But meeting Musk had shattered that illusion. Musk wasn't some untouchable figure. He was a person who had taken risks, faced failures, and made hard decisions to get where he was. And in that moment, Rick understood that the man he had so easily dismissed was far more human and far more impressive than he had ever given credit for. Rick stared at the screen for a moment, then typed quickly, I was wrong. I didn't understand the bigger picture. I've had a lot to learn. I'm sorry for everything I said. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of relief. The weight that had been sitting on his shoulders for so long felt lighter, almost as if the apology had released him from some unspoken burden. But Rick knew that this apology was only the beginning. He still had a long road ahead. He still had to prove to himself and to the world that he was capable of taking the risks Musk had described. This wasn't about making things right with Musk. It was about making things right with himself. As he walked down the street, Rick's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from his old colleague, David, someone he hadn't spoken to in years. They used to be close, but over time, their relationship had drifted apart. David had always been the more adventurous one, the one who took risks, who followed his passions instead of just playing it safe. David, Rick, I've got something to pitch you. It's risky, it's unconventional, but I think you'll like it. Call me when you get a chance. Rick paused. The message caught him off guard. David was always coming up with new ideas, trying to push boundaries. Rick had dismissed most of them in the past as pipe dreams. But now, with Musk's words in his mind, he couldn't ignore it. Could this be the risk Musk was talking about? Was this the opportunity Rick had been waiting for? He pressed the call button and waited, his heart pounding. When David picked up, his voice was upbeat and full of energy, just like Rick remembered. "Rick, glad you called," David said, his enthusiasm contagious. "So, here's the thing. I've been working on a new venture. It's an idea that could completely disrupt the traditional financial industry. But to do it, I need someone with your expertise. Someone who knows the ins and outs of business, someone who can see the big picture." Rick leaned against a nearby wall, feeling a surge of excitement. "What kind of venture are we talking about here?" David laughed. "It's unconventional. We're thinking about merging cutting-edge AI with alternative investment strategies, things that haven't been fully explored yet. It's risky, but if it works, it could change everything. And I need you on board." Rick felt a wave of hesitation. This was the kind of idea he used to dismiss without a second thought. Too risky, too uncertain. But now, after everything he'd learned from Musk, the challenge seemed intriguing. "All right," Rick said, surprising even himself with his response. "I'm in. Let's talk more." David laughed again. "That's what I like to hear. I'll set up a meeting, and we'll go over everything. This could be big, Rick. I'm telling you." As Rick hung up the phone, he felt a new sense of purpose flood through him. This was it. This was the risk Musk had been talking about. It wasn't just about making money or achieving success. It was about pushing boundaries, about doing something that could change the way people thought about business and the world itself. Rick took a deep breath and smiled. The future was unknown, but for the first time, he was ready to face it. The meeting with David was set for the following afternoon. Rick had barely slept the night before, his mind racing with possibilities. A part of him still felt uneasy about jumping into something so unconventional, but the more he thought about it, the more excited he became. This was the risk. This was what Musk had been talking about. It was his chance to break free from the cycle of comfort and predictability he had been trapped in for so long. Rick arrived at David's office building, a sleek, modern structure that contrasted sharply with the conservative atmosphere of his corporate world. As he stepped off the elevator, he felt a sense of anticipation, the kind that comes before a big change. David was already there, leaning over a conference table cluttered with papers, laptops, and a large whiteboard covered in colorful diagrams and notes. His energy was infectious, and he greeted Rick with a wide smile. "Rick, glad you made it," David said, shaking his hand enthusiastically. "Come on in, take a seat. I've got something exciting to show you." Rick sat down across from him, trying to hide his nervousness. This was it, the moment when everything could change. David wasted no time, launching straight into the details of his idea. "So here's what we're thinking," David said, tapping a few keys on his laptop to bring up a detailed presentation. "The financial world is stuck in the past. It's all about traditional investments, stocks, bonds, real estate, all the stuff everyone's already familiar with. But the truth is, most people don't really understand what's going on behind the scenes. They don't see the risks, the opportunities, the patterns." David paused, looking at Rick to gauge his reaction. "We're going to change that. We're developing a platform that uses artificial intelligence to analyze financial markets in ways that no human could. It'll identify opportunities before anyone else can, predict trends, and even adjust portfolios in real time. The AI will be the brain behind the operation, but will also be incorporating alternative investment strategies, things like cryptocurrency, alternative assets, and even things people wouldn't typically think about. Rick leaned in, intrigued despite himself. So, this platform, you want me to come in and help guide it? To make sure it's viable? Exactly, David said, his eyes sparkling. I need someone who can understand both the business side and the tech side. Someone who's not afraid to push boundaries. We're talking about revolutionizing the financial world here, Rick. We're talking about a real game changer. Rick sat back in his chair, feeling the weight of the decision. It wasn't just about the potential of the business. It was about everything it represented. This was the leap of faith Musk had talked about. This was the risk he needed to take. But could he really do it? Could he walk away from the safe, predictable path he had spent years building? David was watching him closely, sensing his hesitation. Rick, I know this sounds crazy. Hell, I know it sounds risky. But this is the future. We're not just betting on technology. We're betting on our ability to innovate, to think outside the box. You've got the expertise. You've got the vision. I'm telling you, this could be huge. Rick felt the familiar tug of doubt, the instinct to play it safe, to stay in his lane. But deep down, he knew David was right. This was what he had been searching for. This was the challenge that could push him to grow, to break free from the constraints of his old life. The question wasn't whether he was capable. The question was whether he was willing to take the risk. I'm in, Rick said, his voice steady, surprising even himself with how sure he sounded. Let's do it. David's face lit up with a broad grin. That's what I like to hear. We're going to make this happen, Rick. I promise you, it's going to be worth it. The next few hours flew by as David outlined the details of the project, the timeline, and the resources they would need to bring it to life. They talked about partnerships, about pitching to investors, about building a team of like-minded innovators. The more Rick heard, the more excited he became. This was the kind of venture he had always dreamed of, something that wasn't just about making money, but about changing the world. As they wrapped up the meeting, Rick felt a sense of exhilaration unlike anything he had ever experienced. The decision had been made. There was no going back now. He stepped out of David's office building, his heart racing with anticipation. The road ahead was uncertain, yes. It would be filled with obstacles, challenges, and plenty of setbacks. But for the first time in years, Rick was ready to face it all. This wasn't just a business venture. This was his leap of faith. And as he walked to his car, he realized something else, something that filled him with an even greater sense of excitement. He wasn't doing this just for the business or the money. He was doing this for himself. This was his chance to prove that he could rise above the fears and doubts that had held him back for so long. He was taking control of his future. As Rick drove home that evening, he thought back to the conversation he'd had with Elon Musk. The billionaire had talked about failure, resilience, and the importance of pushing beyond the boundaries of comfort. He had made it clear that success wasn't just about avoiding mistakes. It was about embracing them, learning from them, and continuing forward. Rick smiled to himself. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready. He was ready for the challenge. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was truly alive. The days following Rick's commitment to David's venture were a blur of activity. There was a lot to learn, a lot to digest, and even more to do. But every day, Rick felt himself growing more confident, more invested in the project. This was the kind of challenge he had been searching for, and he was determined to make it work. David's enthusiasm was contagious. Together, they began assembling a team, individuals with expertise in AI, blockchain, finance, and more. People who weren't afraid to take risks and think beyond the conventional. It wasn't just about building a business. It was about creating something that could change the landscape of finance forever. Rick felt like a rookie all over again. He had spent years in the corporate world, making deals and managing teams, but this was different. This was raw, uncharted territory. It was both exhilarating and humbling. But the more he interacted with the team, the more he realized just how much they needed each other's skills and ideas to succeed. Everyone brought something unique to the table, and Rick knew that the sum of their collective effort could be greater than the individual parts. One evening, after a particularly intense brainstorming session, David called Rick over to his desk. "I want to show you something," he said, tapping a few keys on his computer. The screen flickered to life, revealing a prototype of their platform. The AI was sophisticated, able to predict market trends with startling accuracy. It had a sleek, intuitive interface that made it accessible to investors of all levels. But it was more than just a financial tool. It was a vision. It was the future of investing, designed to make complex decisions simple and to give everyday people the same advantages that the world's most successful investors had. David looked at Rick, his eyes gleaming. "This is it. This is the future. We're going to give people the tools to invest intelligently, to make decisions that are data-driven, not based on emotions or guesswork." Rick stared at the screen, a sense of awe washing over him. He had always known that technology was transforming the world, but seeing it firsthand like this, it was something else entirely. This platform wasn't just a business. It was a movement. "I can't believe how far we've come in such a short time," Rick said, his voice full of admiration. "This is incredible, David." David smiled. "Yeah, but we're just getting started. There's still a lot to do. We need to refine the AI, build partnerships with investors, and most importantly, get the word out. But I know we're onto something big." Rick leaned back in his chair, his thoughts racing. They had built something incredible, but the hardest part was yet to come, taking it to the next level. They needed capital, they needed exposure, and they needed people who believed in the vision as much as they did. As the days turned into weeks, Rick threw himself into the project. He worked late into the night, refining business plans, negotiating with potential investors, and coordinating with the team. But as much as he was invested in the technical and strategic side of the venture, he also began to realize something else: the importance of the people he was working with. The team wasn't just a group of individuals brought together for a business opportunity. They were a family, a support system that could weather the inevitable storms ahead. They had each other's backs, and that sense of unity was what would carry them through the challenges they would face. One afternoon, as Rick and the team sat in the conference room, hashing out their next steps, he looked around at the people who had become more than just colleagues. They were partners in this journey, each one bringing their own unique expertise and perspective. "Hey, I just want to say something," Rick said, standing up. "I know we've all been working our butts off, and there's still a long road ahead, but I'm really proud of what we've accomplished so far. It's not just about the technology or the business, it's about what we're building together. This team, this vision, it's something special." David smiled, nodding in agreement. "Couldn't have said it better myself. We've got a long way to go, but we're on the right track." Rick felt a swell of gratitude. He had always been someone who valued individual achievement, but he was beginning to understand the power of collaboration. The success of this venture wasn't going to be about one person. It was going to be about the collective effort of everyone in that room. As the meeting adjourned, Rick lingered for a moment, watching his team members interact, laughing, strategizing, pushing each other to do better. This was the kind of environment he had always wanted, but had never been able to create on his own. And now, he was a part of something bigger than himself, a movement that could truly make a difference. Later that evening, as Rick walked to his car, he couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. Just a few months ago, he had been a man trapped in the cycle of safety and routine. Now, he was living on the edge, taking risks, building something that could change the world. It was a life he had never imagined, but one he had come to embrace fully. Rick pulled out his phone to check his notifications. His viral video from years ago was still attracting attention. More comments, more views. As he scrolled through, he came across a comment that stood out. "You've come a long way, Rick. I was there when you insulted Elon Musk, but I'm proud of what you've become." Rick smiled as he read the words. It was a small comment, but it meant more than anything he could have imagined. The person who had posted it was right. He had come a long way, and the journey was just beginning. The momentum was building. The team was functioning like a well-oiled machine, and Rick felt more confident than ever in their vision. But as the venture gained more attention, the stakes got higher. They needed funding, and they needed it fast. Investors were starting to take notice, but so were competitors. The world of alternative investments and AI-driven finance was no longer a quiet space. It was a battlefield. One afternoon, as Rick sat in his office reviewing a potential pitch deck, his phone buzzed. It was a text from David. "Big meeting tomorrow. Potential investor. This could make or break us." Rick's stomach tightened as he read the message. He had been part of countless pitches in his corporate days, but this was different. The stakes felt personal. They weren't just pitching a product, they were pitching a vision. And if they failed, it wasn't just money on the line. It was the future of what they had worked so hard to build. David's text came with a follow-up. "Meet me at 8:30 a.m. sharp. We need to be ready." Rick spent the rest of the evening preparing. They had a solid prototype, a team full of talent, and a market demand for their product. But it wasn't just about the numbers, it was about passion. It was about convincing the investor that this wasn't just another venture. It was the future of finance, and they had the key to unlock it. The next morning, Rick arrived at David's office, his nerves in check, but his mind buzzing with questions. Would they be able to close the deal? Would the investor see their potential? Or would they be dismissed as another big idea that couldn't follow through? David was already there, pacing in front of a whiteboard, running through the pitch one last time. He stopped when he saw Rick and gave him a determined smile. "We've got this," he said, trying to mask his own anxiety. Rick nodded, taking a deep breath. "Let's do it." The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m., but they were asked to arrive early to set up. When they walked into the sleek, modern office building, Rick's pulse quickened. This wasn't a small-time investor. This was someone who had the potential to make or break their entire operation. They were greeted by a man in his early 40s, sharp-dressed and confident. His name was Ethan Parker, one of Silicon Valley's top investors. His reputation was built on identifying disruptive technologies and helping them scale into massive businesses. He had turned many a startup into a billion-dollar success story, and he was known for his no-nonsense approach. Ethan led them into a glass-walled conference room, where the air seemed thick with expectation. He took a seat at the head of the table, folding his arms and looking at them intently. There was no small talk, no niceties. He got straight to the point. "So, what is it that you're trying to do?" Ethan asked, his tone sharp. "You're not the first team to come in here with an AI-driven financial platform. Why should I believe you'll succeed where others have failed?" Rick and David exchanged a quick glance. This was it, the moment of truth. Rick cleared his throat and took a step forward, ready to answer. "We're not just creating another financial platform. We're building the future of investing. A system that doesn't just react to market changes, but predicts them. We're leveraging artificial intelligence to make smarter, data-driven decisions that give our users a competitive edge. But it's not just about technology. It's about creating a system that democratizes access to financial tools that were previously only available to the elite." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly are you going to do that?" David stepped in, his voice steady but full of excitement. "By combining AI with alternative investment strategies, things like blockchain, cryptocurrency, and emerging markets that aren't fully tapped into yet. We're not just following trends. We're creating them. And we believe this is the future of investing, one that's powered by intelligence, not guesswork." Ethan leaned back in his chair, clearly intrigued, but still skeptical. "Interesting. But how do you plan on scaling this? What makes you think you can beat out the competition?" Rick could feel the pressure mounting, but he remained calm. "We've got a team that knows how to move fast and make smart decisions. We've already built the prototype, and it's outperforming traditional investment strategies. We have a unique understanding of both the technology and the financial markets, and we've already made key strategic partnerships. But what sets us apart is our commitment to using this technology to give everyone, not just the wealthy elite, access to the same tools." Ethan was silent for a long moment, his eyes scanning their faces. Rick held his breath. He couldn't tell if Ethan was convinced or if he was just being polite before delivering a rejection. Finally, Ethan spoke. "Okay, I like the vision. But here's the thing. I'm not interested in funding an idea. I'm interested in funding a team that can execute. You've got potential, but I need to see more than just a prototype and some nice words." I need proof. David's expression tightened, but Rick knew this was the moment they needed to push. We're willing to show you everything. Our projections, our early results, and most importantly, how we plan on scaling. We've got a roadmap that shows how we can reach the next phase and beyond, and we've already started bringing in early users who are seeing real results. Ethan didn't say anything for a long time. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Finally, he nodded slowly. All right, I'll give you a shot, but you've got to prove that you can scale. You've got 6 months. Show me that this isn't just another pipe dream, and I'll consider funding you. But if you can't show me growth, real, measurable growth, then we're done. Rick's heart pounded. 6 months. They had 6 months to prove everything. It wasn't much time, but it was more than he had expected. Thank you, Rick said, his voice filled with relief. We won't let you down. Ethan gave them a curt nod. You better not. As they walked out of the conference room, Rick felt a mix of exhilaration and anxiety. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The pressure was on, but they had a chance. They had the opportunity to prove everything they had been working for, and they weren't about to let it slip away. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Rick barely slept that night. The pressure was immense. 6 months. 6 months to prove they weren't just another failed startup. It felt like a countdown, a ticking clock that was only getting louder. Over the next few weeks, the team worked around the clock, refining the platform, adjusting the AI algorithms, and collecting data. They weren't just aiming for success anymore. They were aiming for perfection. Every detail mattered. Every decision counted. But even as the progress seemed steady, Rick couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Despite their growing confidence, there was still a nagging doubt in the back of his mind. What if they failed? What if Ethan Parker was right, and they were just another pipe dream destined to fizzle out? David seemed to sense Rick's unease. One evening, after a long day of meetings and brainstorming sessions, he called Rick into his office. Hey, you okay? David asked, his tone more serious than usual. Rick ran a hand through his hair, sighing. I don't know, man. I keep thinking about the deadline. We've got 6 months to prove ourselves, and it feels like we're racing against time. We've got a great product, but I'm still not sure it's enough. David leaned back in his chair, eyes thoughtful. I get it. The pressure is intense. But here's the thing. We can't control everything. We can't predict every outcome. All we can do is our best and trust the process. We're building something incredible, Rick. This is the future of investing. But success, it's not just about the product. It's about how we sell the vision. Rick stared at his friend for a long moment. He knew David was right, but the weight of the responsibility still felt overwhelming. They were standing on the edge of something monumental, but the risk of failure was just as great. We're not just selling a product, Rick said, more to himself than to David. We're selling a belief that we can change the system, that we can do things differently. David nodded. Exactly. The technology, the platform, the data, it's all important. But what really matters is the belief behind it. If we don't have that, none of this matters. Rick took a deep breath. All right, let's do this. We'll give it everything we've got. And that's exactly what they did. Day after day, they pushed forward, refining the system, gathering more feedback from early adopters, and analyzing the performance of the platform. They were meticulous in their approach, making sure everything was aligned with the vision they had set out to achieve. The team was working in sync, each member playing their part, each one motivated by the same belief, that they could make a real difference in the financial world. But even with all the progress, the tension was palpable. Rick knew that they were getting closer to the tipping point. One wrong move, one mistake, and it could all come crashing down. They needed to be perfect. A month into the 6-month timeline, Ethan scheduled a follow-up meeting. This would be the pivotal moment, where they would either secure the investment or lose it all. The team was in overdrive. They polished the platform until it shone, perfecting the algorithms, fine-tuning the user interface. They worked on their pitch, refining their talking points and making sure they could demonstrate both the tangible results and the long-term vision of the company. When the day of the meeting finally arrived, Rick found himself pacing nervously outside Ethan's office. It felt like déjà vu. He had been here before, but this time, it was different. This wasn't just about presenting an idea. It was about presenting everything they had worked for. Their vision, their dream. David put a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You got this, Rick. We all believe in this. Let's show Ethan what we've got. Rick nodded, trying to calm the nerves that threatened to overtake him. It was time. They had put everything into this. Now, it was time to let it speak for itself. When they entered the conference room, Ethan was already there, waiting for them with a stern but curious look on his face. All right, let's see what you've got, Ethan said, his tone businesslike. Show me why I should put my money into this. Rick stepped forward, feeling the weight of the moment settle in his chest. Thank you for giving us this opportunity, Ethan. We know that we're asking you to take a risk, but we believe that we've built something that can change the way people think about investing. David quickly ran through the key features of their platform, highlighting the improvements they'd made since the last meeting. They demonstrated the AI in real time, showing Ethan how the system could predict trends, adjust portfolios, and even suggest alternative investments based on real-time market data. But the real magic happened when they presented the numbers. The early users had reported impressive results. Users who had invested small amounts had already seen significant returns. The data spoke for itself. The platform wasn't just promising, it was already delivering. Ethan sat in silence, watching the presentation unfold. Rick could feel the tension mounting in the room. He knew this was the moment when everything could change. The final judgment was coming. When they finished, Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Well, Ethan said, his voice low. You've definitely improved since the last time we spoke. I'm impressed by the results. And I'll admit, you've got me intrigued. But here's the thing, Rick, David. You've shown me a lot of potential. But potential doesn't always lead to success. You've still got a long road ahead. You're going to face competition, you're going to face setbacks, and you're going to face challenges that you can't even predict right now. Rick swallowed hard, but he refused to break eye contact with Ethan. We know. We've anticipated that. And we're ready. We believe in this, Ethan. And we're going to make it work. Ethan looked at them for a long moment, the silence heavy in the air. Finally, he spoke. I'm in. I'll fund you. But let me make one thing clear. I'm not doing this because I think it's easy. I'm doing this because I believe you can pull it off. Now, let's make it happen. Rick felt a wave of relief wash over him. This was it. They had secured the investment. They had taken the leap, and now they were going to change the game. As they left the conference room, David clapped Rick on the back. We did it, man. We did it. Rick smiled, the weight of the moment sinking in. This was just the beginning. They had a long way to go, but they had crossed the tipping point. They had earned their shot. And now, the real work would begin. The news hit the team like a thunderbolt. Ethan Parker, the investor who had the power to turn their startup into a massive success, had committed to backing them. They had secured the funding they needed to move forward. The future was suddenly brimming with possibilities. But with opportunity came pressure. Rick could hardly believe it. After months of grueling work, sleepless nights, and constant doubts, they had made it. But the road ahead was far from easy. Scaling the platform, attracting more users, expanding into new markets, this was the next frontier, and it would require even more than they had given up until now. In the weeks following the meeting, the team was thrown into overdrive. The first challenge was making sure that the platform could handle the surge in users that would inevitably follow the injection of funding. They needed more server capacity, better security measures, and enhanced data analytics to ensure that the AI system could scale to meet demand. David called an emergency team meeting to discuss the next steps. We've got the funding we need. Now, we need to scale, David began, his voice filled with excitement and resolve. We're not just building a product anymore. We're building an empire. But if we want to succeed, we need to be ready to handle the growth. Rick nodded, his mind racing with the possibilities. They had already started testing the AI, collecting feedback from their early users, and integrating new features. But this was a different ballgame. They weren't just working with a small user base now. They were going to be thrust into the spotlight, and the expectations would be higher than ever. The team dove headfirst into the challenge. They doubled down on improving the backend architecture, ensuring the platform could handle millions of users simultaneously. Engineers worked tirelessly, coding late into the night to perfect the AI. They needed to be able to predict trends with even greater accuracy and adapt in real time to market fluctuations. If they were going to disrupt the finance world, the technology had to be flawless. But as the work piled up, the stress began to show. Tensions flared in the office as deadlines loomed. Rick could see the wear and tear on his team. They were exhausted, but they knew the stakes were high. One afternoon, after a particularly heated discussion with the engineers over a server issue, Rick found himself walking through the office, trying to clear his head. He had just wrapped up a conference call with Ethan, who had been pushing them to deliver results faster. The pressure was mounting, and Rick could feel the weight of it bearing down on him. He found David in the break room, grabbing a cup of coffee. David looked up when he saw Rick, offering a tired but supportive smile. "Long day?" David asked. Rick let out a frustrated sigh. "Yeah, man. We're running out of time. Ethan's breathing down our necks, and I'm starting to feel like we're in over our heads." David paused, setting his coffee cup down on the counter. "You know, I've been thinking about that. We're not in over our heads. We're exactly where we're supposed to be. This is what we signed up for. We knew it was going to be hard." Rick took a deep breath, nodding slowly. "I know. Sometimes I wonder if we can actually pull this off. It's not just about the tech anymore. It's about everything. Scaling, market adoption, competitors." David placed a hand on Rick's shoulder, offering a reassuring squeeze. "We've come this far because we believe in what we're building. And we have a team that's just as invested as we are. Yeah, it's scary, but we're not doing this alone." Rick felt a sense of calm settle over him. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear that. They had made it this far, and they were going to keep pushing forward, together. Later that week, the team came together for a crucial brainstorming session. They knew that they had to get the marketing strategy right. This was the moment to make their platform not just a tool but a household name. They needed to capture the attention of potential users, investors, and the media. Rick stepped up to the whiteboard, a marker in his hand. "All right, we need to think bigger," he said, looking around the room. "We've got the tech. Now we need to get people to believe in it. We need a marketing campaign that will make waves." The room fell silent as everyone thought through the possibilities. "How about targeting influencers in the finance world?" one of the marketing team members suggested. "People who are already known for their investment strategies and financial advice. If we get them on board, it could snowball." David nodded thoughtfully. "I like that, but we need more than just influencers. We need a story, something that resonates with people on an emotional level. What's the why behind our platform? Why should the average person care?" Rick turned to the board, scribbling down his thoughts. "It's not just about making money. It's about empowerment. We're giving people the tools to take control of their financial futures. It's not about just the rich getting richer. It's about making smart investing accessible to everyone." The team began to build off that idea. They could create a campaign around the message of empowerment, showing real users who had seen success with the platform. They could use social media, webinars, and influencer partnerships to spread the word. And most importantly, they needed to emphasize that anyone, regardless of their financial background, could be a successful investor with the right tools. The plan came together quickly. They mapped out timelines, set up partnerships with key influencers, and began producing video content that demonstrated the platform's power. Rick could feel the excitement building again. This was their chance to make a real impact, to show the world that this wasn't just another financial platform, it was a movement. As the days turned into weeks, the team continued to push forward. The platform's performance improved, and the marketing campaign began to generate buzz. Users were signing up, and the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. But even with all the progress, Rick knew that the real test was just around the corner. They had to deliver results to Ethan and to the world. Rick stood in the office one late evening, looking out the window at the city below. The road to success was never going to be easy, but they had already come so far. The platform was gaining traction, their team was stronger than ever, and they had a clear vision for the future. This wasn't just a startup anymore. It was a movement, and Rick was ready to take it to the next level. As the weeks passed, Rick couldn't help but feel a sense of momentum building. Their marketing campaign was generating buzz, the user base was expanding, and the platform was starting to gain real traction in the financial sector. But just as they were starting to think they had things under control, something unexpected happened. One Friday afternoon, while Rick was reviewing some user data, his phone buzzed. It was a message from one of the lead engineers, Tom. "Rick, we've got a serious problem. The platform crashed." Rick's stomach dropped as he read the message. He immediately called Tom. "What do you mean the platform crashed?" Rick asked, trying to stay calm. "Is it down for everyone?" "It's bad, Rick. The system is overloaded. We had a surge in users this morning, and our servers can't handle it. The AI is stuck in a loop, and we can't get it back up right now," Tom explained, his voice tight with urgency. Rick's heart pounded. This wasn't supposed to happen. They had prepared for growth, made sure the infrastructure was solid, and yet now, everything was crumbling. The worst part was that this wasn't just a technical issue. It was a disaster waiting to be discovered by the press and investors. Rick's mind raced. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. Okay. Keep me updated, Tom. Do whatever you can to get it back up." "I'll gather the team," Rick said before hanging up. He immediately called David. "David, we've got a serious problem. The platform crashed. The entire system is down." David's voice was filled with concern. "What? How? What happened?" "We don't know yet, but we need to get everyone working on this now," Rick replied, pacing around his office, trying to think of a way to fix the situation. Rick called an emergency team meeting. The room filled quickly with concerned faces, each of them knowing the gravity of the situation. Their product was their lifeline, and without it, everything they had worked for could come to a screeching halt. "We've just had a major crash in the system," Rick began, his voice steady despite the chaos in his head. "The AI's gone haywire, and the platform is down. We don't know the full extent yet, but we need to figure this out and get it back online. Fast." The room was silent as the weight of the situation set in. One of the engineers, Sarah, spoke up. "We've been seeing increased traffic, but this is beyond what we anticipated. We'll need to rework the server load balancing and optimize the AI, but we'll need more resources to get it back up." Rick nodded. "Let's do whatever it takes. Bring in whoever you need. This is critical. We can't afford to let this blow up." As the team scrambled to troubleshoot the issue, Rick's mind was elsewhere. Ethan Parker had been very clear. He expected results, and he expected them quickly. If word got out that they had experienced a crash, it could destroy everything they'd built. Rick knew he had to get ahead of this. He texted Ethan, trying to stay calm while preparing for the worst. "Ethan, we've run into an issue with the platform. There's been a system crash due to increased traffic, and we're working to get it back online. We'll have it fixed within hours. I'll keep you updated." Rick didn't know if Ethan would buy it. If this crash wasn't fixed quickly, it could derail everything. Hours passed, and the situation worsened. The AI wasn't responding, and the engineers were struggling to get everything back online. Rick could feel the pressure mounting, and he was starting to feel the panic setting in. This wasn't just a glitch. It was a full-blown crisis. David came over to Rick's desk, his face pale. "I've been talking to the engineers. We might need to take the system offline for a few hours to get everything stable. It's going to be a risk, especially with the investors watching." Rick ran his hands through his hair, trying to think through the options. "If we do that, it could look like we're failing. Ethan's not going to take kindly to this." David nodded, his expression grim. "I know, but it's either that or risk a total meltdown. We need to make sure this doesn't happen again. The system needs to be bulletproof." Rick exhaled slowly. The decision was clear. They had to take the system offline, but they needed to act fast. He texted Ethan again, hoping to manage the damage. "Ethan, we're working on a fix right now. It's a server issue due to a surge in users. We're taking the system offline temporarily to stabilize it. I'll keep you posted on our progress." Rick had no idea how Ethan would react, but he knew they were running out of time. By midnight, the engineers finally had the system back up and running, but Rick was exhausted. They had managed to fix the crash, but the damage was done. They had lost precious hours, and the uncertainty of the situation lingered. Rick called Ethan again, his mind still racing. "Ethan, The system is back online. We've fixed the issue and are implementing additional measures to prevent it from happening again. I know this was a setback, but we're in a much better position now. Ethan's voice on the other end of the phone was cold and unreadable. I understand, but this isn't something I can overlook. You've got a great idea here, Rick, but I need you to understand that failures like this can't happen again. Investors don't like surprises. Rick nodded, even though Ethan couldn't see it. I understand, Ethan. We're doing everything we can to make sure this doesn't happen again. When the call ended, Rick slumped back in his chair. He had just narrowly avoided a disaster. But the next time the platform went down, if there was a next time, it wouldn't be so easy to recover. David came in and placed a hand on Rick's shoulder. We got through it, man. It's not over yet. Rick nodded, but the feeling of uncertainty hadn't quite left him. They had dodged a bullet, but he knew this was only the beginning. They couldn't afford another failure. Not now. Not when they were so close. The next few days were a blur. The engineers worked tirelessly to make sure the platform was stable, tweaking the servers, improving the load balancing, and testing the AI's response times. They were in crisis mode, but Rick couldn't afford to focus solely on the technical side. There was a bigger issue looming. Their reputation? Ethan's warning still rang in Rick's ears. Investors didn't like surprises. And while they'd managed to fix the problem quickly, the fact remained that the platform had crashed, something they could never afford to happen again, not with so much on the line. Rick called a team meeting to address the issue head-on. All right, everyone, he began, standing at the front of the room. I know things have been crazy lately, and I want to be clear. What happened last week cannot happen again. We're not just building a product anymore. We're building a reputation, and that reputation is fragile. There was a collective nod from the room. The engineers had already been working around the clock, and now they needed to take action to ensure that the same thing didn't happen again. We're making some key changes to the infrastructure, Rick continued. More servers, more redundancy. We're making sure this system can scale with any number of users, no matter how fast it grows. But I need everyone's full focus. No more mistakes. David, who had been standing next to Rick, chimed in. We've got the technology, but now it's about building trust. The users need to feel like they can rely on us. They need to know that we're not going anywhere, that we've got their backs. The team was quiet, absorbing the weight of their words. Trust was everything now. Without it, everything they had worked for would crumble. Rick took a deep breath. Let's show them that we can fix this. Let's show them that we're better than this crash. We're going to come back stronger. The room buzzed with renewed energy. There was a sense of urgency, but also an understanding that they had to make this work. There was no other option. As the team got back to work, Rick sat in his office, staring at the screen. He had to face the reality. They were in the eye of the storm. One mistake could bring everything crashing down again. And this time, there might not be a second chance. That evening, Rick received a text from Ethan. He read it slowly. I hope you're on top of this. I'm hearing some noise from the press about the outage. We can't afford bad publicity. Let's talk tomorrow. Don't let this happen again. Rick's stomach tightened. The press? He had expected some internal concern, but this was a warning shot. Ethan was serious, and Rick knew the truth. If the public caught wind of the crash, it could be the end. Rick immediately called David. We need to prepare a public statement. The media is already starting to catch wind of the crash, and I can't let this spiral. David agreed. We have to be transparent, but we can't sound like we're scrambling. We need to assure our users and the press that we've fixed the issue and are committed to improving. The next morning, Rick sat down with the marketing team to craft the statement. They decided on a direct approach. They would acknowledge the issue, explain the steps they were taking to prevent it from happening again, and emphasize that their platform was stronger than ever. After several rounds of edits, the statement was ready. We recently experienced an unexpected system crash that temporarily impacted our platform. We understand how important our service is to you, and we take full responsibility for the downtime. Our team has worked tirelessly to resolve the issue, and we've implemented additional safeguards to ensure that this doesn't happen again. We remain committed to providing a reliable and innovative service, and we appreciate your continued trust. Rick read the statement one last time before giving it the green light. It was clear, honest, and confident. He hoped it would do the trick. Later that day, they released the statement to the press, along with a video from Rick himself, apologizing for the outage and reaffirming their commitment to building a platform that users could rely on. Rick sat in his office, nervously watching the news feed. Would they be accepted back into the fold? Would the public buy it? By the next morning, it was clear they had managed to mitigate the damage. The media coverage was mostly neutral, with some outlets commending them for being transparent. It wasn't perfect, but it was far better than Rick had feared. David walked into Rick's office with a grin. It looks like we've weathered the storm. Public reaction's been solid. Some of the tech sites even said it was a good recovery. Rick let out a long breath. I was really worried we'd lost our shot, but I guess we still have some room to prove ourselves. David nodded. We've got this. Now we need to make sure we're not just talking the talk. We've got to keep delivering. We've got one chance to show that we're not just another startup, that we're a force to be reckoned with. Rick smiled, the weight of the last few days lifting off his shoulders. And we will. We just need to keep pushing forward, one day at a time. The team's momentum picked up again. They dove back into refining the platform, focusing on every detail to make sure it was scalable, secure, and user-friendly. They knew that they had come too far to let anything jeopardize their dream. But as the pressure grew and expectations mounted, Rick couldn't shake the feeling that the next challenge was just around the corner. They had managed to survive the crash, but the road to success was never straight. And he had learned by now that nothing in this journey would come easily. The weeks following the crash recovery were filled with a renewed sense of purpose. The team worked tirelessly, refining their platform, adding new features, and addressing any lingering technical issues. They were determined to show the world that the setback was just a temporary glitch, and they were back on track. However, just as they thought they were gaining solid ground, an unexpected threat emerged. It started with a late-night email that Rick received on a Friday evening. The subject line read, "New competitor launching, major threat to our market position." Rick frowned as he opened the email. It was from one of their industry insiders, someone who had been following the tech and finance space closely. The email contained a link to an announcement on a competitor's new platform, which was shockingly similar to their own. The interface, the AI-powered analysis, even the core features, they were nearly identical to what Rick and his team had worked so hard to create. The email continued, "They've raised significant funding and have a partnership with a major financial institution. They're set to launch next week. This could be serious competition for your product." Rick felt his stomach tighten. A competitor with better funding, a solid partnership, and a platform that mirrored their own? This was the kind of challenge he had feared when they first started. The financial technology space was crowded, but they had believed their innovation would give them the edge. Now, it seemed that someone else had caught up, and quickly. Rick immediately called David. "You need to see this," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "We've got a competitor launching next week. Their platform looks almost identical to ours. They've got big investors, and they've already got a partnership with a major bank." David took a deep breath. "Damn, I knew it was only a matter of time before someone came for us. How big of a threat are they?" Rick clicked through the details in the email. They're funded by a venture capital firm that's been backing a lot of successful startups. They've got the resources to scale fast. We're talking about a real competitor here. If they execute as well as we think they will, it could steal our users. David ran a hand through his hair, processing the news. "We can't afford to panic. We've already built a solid user base, and we've got the tech to back it up. But we need to act fast. We can't just sit back and wait to see what they do." Rick agreed. "We need to figure out how we're going to fight back. I don't want to be reactive. We need to stay ahead of them, make sure we're offering something they don't have." David smiled, a determined look spreading across his face. "We've got the better tech, Rick. Our AI is more advanced, our features are more customizable, and we're listening to our users. We just need to make sure they know that." The team gathered in the conference room early the next morning, and Rick outlined the situation. "We've got a competitor launching next week. Their platform looks similar to ours, but we know we have the edge with our AI. What we need to do now is double down on our strengths," Rick said. "Our platform is built for the long term. We need to position ourselves as the smarter, more intuitive choice for users who want to make smarter financial decisions." David added, We can't just rely on what we've already done. We need to ramp up our marketing efforts, keep highlighting our unique value proposition, and reinforce our relationship with users. We're not just another platform. We're offering personalized financial tools that are built to grow with them. The brainstorming session was intense. They decided to launch a targeted campaign that would emphasize the unique aspects of their platform, particularly its user-friendly design and predictive capabilities. They would also promote the new features they'd been working on, such as deeper market insights, advanced risk analysis, and real-time alerts. These were features that set them apart and would give users a reason to stay loyal. Rick was determined not to let the competitors' launch throw them off course. He knew that the key to staying ahead wasn't just about technology, it was about brand loyalty and trust. If they could continue to build a relationship with their users, they'd have a better chance of weathering any competition that came their way. Over the next few days, the marketing team got to work on the campaign, drafting blog posts, social media content, and email newsletters that would speak directly to their audience's pain points. They also began reaching out to influencers in the financial sector to help spread the word. Rick didn't just want to respond to the competition. He wanted to set the narrative. If they could capture the attention of the press and show their users that they were committed to innovation, it would give them a solid edge in the market. But even with all the preparation, Rick couldn't shake the feeling that this was a turning point. If they didn't act quickly and decisively, they could lose everything. The stakes had never been higher. As the competitor's launch date drew closer, Rick found himself working long hours, making sure that everything was in place for their counterattack. But it wasn't just about the tech or the marketing, it was about leadership. Rick needed to show his team that they could still win this battle, despite the odds. One evening, as Rick was wrapping up some work in his office, he received a call from Ethan Parker. Rick wasn't sure whether he was relieved or terrified to hear from him. "Rick, I've been following the developments with this new competitor," Ethan began, his tone measured. "I know things have been tough, but I want to remind you that this is exactly what we expected. It's a competitive market. Now is the time to show your investors and your users why you're different." Rick nodded, even though Ethan couldn't see him. "I'm on it. We're doubling down on what makes us unique. We've got the better product, and we're going to show the world that we can adapt faster than anyone else." Ethan's voice softened. "Good. Just remember, investors want results. You've got a great product, but it's all about execution. You can't afford to take your foot off the gas." Rick hung up the phone, a sense of urgency settling over him. Ethan was right. This was their moment to prove that they could weather any storm. He gathered the team that evening, ready to give them one last push before the competition launched. "We've come too far to let anyone knock us off track," Rick said, his voice filled with conviction. "This is our time to show the world that we're not just a startup. We're a force to be reckoned with. Let's go out there and make sure we own this market." The team erupted in applause, fired up and ready to take on the challenge. It was time to show the world that they were here to stay. The morning of the competitor's launch arrived with an unsettling feeling of tension in the office. The team had worked tirelessly on their counter-campaign, but now, the time had come to face the challenge head-on. Rick stood in front of the large conference room window, gazing out at the city below. The weight of the situation settled on his shoulders. Their survival was in the hands of the users. David approached him, a cup of coffee in hand, his expression focused but not without a hint of concern. "It's happening. They've gone live." Rick nodded, his jaw tightening. The competitor's platform was now officially out in the market, and every financial news outlet seemed to be covering the story. It was the talk of the industry. "They've raised a ton of capital," David continued, "and they've partnered with one of the largest banks in the country. Their marketing is polished, professionals at work. But we know what we've got. Let's just hope our users do too." Rick turned to face him, a slight grin tugging at his lips. "We'll see. Let's make sure they know what we can do better." The next few hours were a whirlwind. Social media buzzed with mentions of the new competitor's launch, and the press started posting detailed reviews of the platform. Rick's stomach churned as he read the headlines. The competitor was receiving glowing reviews for its interface, its speed, and the innovative partnership with the big bank. But none of these features were truly revolutionary. They were just polished, dressed-up versions of things Rick's platform already did. Still, Rick knew that perception mattered. As much as he wanted to brush off the competition as a mere copycat, he couldn't ignore the reality that they were gaining attention. And in the tech world, attention was everything. Rick pulled David into a quick strategy meeting. "We need to ramp up our outreach today," Rick said, his voice firm. "We're not going to sit here and let them steal the spotlight. We need to show the users why we're the smarter choice." David nodded. "We've got the better AI. We've got real-time alerts that can make a difference. We've been listening to our users and adapting. They're using buzzwords, but we're using results." Rick was already opening his laptop, pulling up the data from their user base and the marketing campaigns they've been working on. "I want to target the users who are still on the fence. We need to let them know how we've been improving and why we're the better long-term choice. Also, get in touch with the press. We need to make sure we're positioned as the tech leader here, not just another option." David started typing away on his phone, reaching out to the media contacts and influencer partners they'd worked with over the past few months. Rick's phone buzzed with notifications. It was Ethan. "I'm seeing the media coverage. Keep me updated. This could get ugly fast if you don't respond properly. Investors are watching." Rick didn't have time to respond immediately. Instead, he called David back into his office. "We need to get ahead of this before they make another move," Rick said, feeling a rush of adrenaline. "Their launch is just the beginning. We need to show our users that we're ahead of the curve, that our AI is going to revolutionize the way they approach finance." As Rick continued mapping out the campaign with his team, he couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency mounting. The competitor's launch was shaking things up more than he had anticipated. But he refused to back down. They had a product worth fighting for, and he was determined to prove it. By the end of the day, their marketing efforts were in full swing. Press releases were sent out, social media posts flooded timelines, and influencers began sharing their thoughts on why Rick's platform was the more reliable choice. But the competition wasn't going to give up easily. Rick spent the evening reviewing new user feedback and platform analytics. It wasn't all bad news. The user base was growing, and there was still excitement around their new features. But there was no denying it. Competition was fierce, and they had to keep pushing forward. As the night wore on, Rick received an email from a well-known tech journalist who had been following their story. The journalist had been writing about the competitor's launch, but now they were reaching out to Rick for a quote. The timing couldn't have been better. Rick's mind raced as he composed his response, carefully crafting his words to position their platform as the innovative, user-focused leader in the industry. Email to journalist. "Thank you for reaching out. While we respect the competition, we believe our platform stands apart because of its adaptability, the powerful AI tools we've built, and our commitment to providing users with the best possible financial insights. We're focused on long-term growth and real results, not just flashy partnerships. Our mission is to help users make smarter financial decisions, and we're delivering on that promise." Rick hit send and leaned back in his chair, a sense of relief washing over him. At least they were being heard. But just as he was about to close his laptop, another email popped up from Ethan. "I see the response to the competitor. Keep pushing, but don't get complacent. You're not just competing with them. You're competing for your future. Get it right, and you're golden. Get it wrong, and we're back to square one." Rick stared at the message, the weight of Ethan's words sinking in. Ethan wasn't pulling punches, and Rick knew that every step they took in the next few days would determine whether they succeeded or failed. The following week was a blur of activity, press coverage, and user engagement. While the competitor's platform continued to generate buzz, it became clear that their promise of innovation wasn't matching the reality of what they were offering. User reviews started trickling in, some praising the platform but others pointing out its limitations. Rick and his team didn't let up. They doubled down on the user-focused improvements they had been pushing. They hosted webinars, engaged with their community on social media, and continued to enhance the AI's capabilities. Every new feature, every fix, was an opportunity to outshine the competition. By the end of the week, Rick was cautiously optimistic. The competition had made a splash, but they hadn't been able to follow through with the level of sophistication that Rick's team had built into their platform. And while there was still plenty of room for growth, Rick felt like they had weathered the storm, at least for now. But as he sat down that evening, reviewing feedback and preparing for the next round of updates, Rick couldn't help but feel the growing pressure. The competitor's launch had been a wake-up call, and he knew that there would be many more challenges ahead. They had survived this round, but the battle was far from over. With the competitor's launch behind them, Rick thought he could finally take a breath. However, just as they were gaining traction, the next crisis appeared on the horizon. This time, it wasn't the competition. It was something far more unexpected. A sudden shift in the tech landscape and a series of new alliances that had the potential to change everything. It all began with an urgent email that Rick received late on a Thursday afternoon. The subject read, "Important Industry Partnership Announcement." Rick opened it quickly. The email was from a trusted industry source, informing him of a major partnership between a rival startup and one of the world's largest cloud infrastructure providers. The deal would dramatically increase the rival's scalability and further improve their platform's capabilities. The move had the potential to reshape the market, giving the competitor the resources they needed to quickly scale and outpace Rick's team. Rick immediately called David into his office, his face grim. "David, you need to see this." David read through the email, his expression tightening with concern. "This is huge. They've just secured an agreement with one of the biggest cloud providers in the world. If they integrate with their infrastructure, they'll have almost limitless scalability." Rick leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "Exactly. And we don't have that kind of resource backing. We need to find a way to level the playing field." David paced around the office, his mind working through the options. "We could try to find similar partnerships, but honestly, that's going to take time. Time we don't have." Rick's mind raced. It was becoming clear. The startup that was once just another competitor was now a formidable force. The market was shifting, and Rick had to act fast to avoid being left behind. That night, as Rick stared at the news and contemplated their next steps, a thought gnawed at him. Could they find their own strategic partnership? Could they team up with someone big enough to match their rival's new alliance? The next morning, Rick called a meeting with his key leadership team. They needed to discuss their options and formulate a new strategy. "We have two options right now," Rick began, standing at the front of the room. "We can either try to scramble and make up for this lost ground by forming our own partnership, or we can look for a way to differentiate ourselves more clearly and pivot our approach." David spoke up. "We could explore partnerships, but like I said, that will take time. We need something more immediate, something that gives us the advantage now." Rick took a deep breath. "You're right. Let's think about how we can use what we already have. We've built one of the most advanced AI-driven financial platforms in the industry, but we need to find a way to make it even more indispensable to our users." A voice from the back of the room interrupted. It was Carla, the head of marketing. "What if we reposition our value proposition? We're not just competing on technology anymore. We've built a community. What if we can leverage our users, engage them, and create a sort of ecosystem around our product? If we build loyalty, they'll follow us no matter what." Rick looked at her, intrigued. "So you're suggesting we focus more on user engagement and loyalty instead of just competing on features?" Carla nodded. "Exactly. We know we're a better product, but what if we can make our platform feel like a community? Something users are truly invested in?" Rick's mind spun. He had always known that a strong community could be one of the most valuable assets for any tech company. But could they turn their user base into something more than just passive customers? "I like the idea," Rick said slowly, "but we need to take it a step further. We need to turn this community into our biggest asset. We need a strategy that blends both user loyalty and a clear market differentiation. But it's going to take full buy-in from everyone." David clapped his hands together. "Let's do it. Let's build a movement around our platform. Let's make our users feel like they're part of something bigger." The days following that meeting were intense. Rick's team worked tirelessly to brainstorm and implement new ways to engage with their user base. They introduced community-driven events, where users could directly interact with the developers, suggest features, and offer feedback. They created exclusive webinars and content that users could access, giving them more than just a platform, but a place to learn, grow, and invest in their future. They also launched a new referral program, giving users incentives for inviting others to join the platform. The idea was to turn each satisfied customer into a brand ambassador. Carla's team designed ads and social media campaigns that emphasized the unique value of being part of the platform's community. They called it the next step in your financial journey, a phrase that resonated with the user's desire for growth and empowerment. But as Rick looked at the flurry of activity happening across the team, he couldn't shake the sense of urgency that still hung over everything. The competitor wasn't standing still. They were advancing, and every day that passed, they were gaining ground. Rick decided to take the plunge and reach out to one of his industry connections, someone who might be able to offer insights or, at the very least, some guidance on how to navigate this new era of heightened competition. He set up a lunch meeting with Robert Mason, a well-respected angel investor who had been involved in several successful startups. Robert had a reputation for being brutally honest, and Rick appreciated that. If anyone could give him a clear perspective, it was Robert. As they sat down at a quiet restaurant in the city, Rick got straight to the point. "Robert, we've hit a crossroads," Rick began. "A competitor has just secured a major partnership, and they're scaling faster than we can keep up. We're working on building a stronger community, but I'm wondering if that's enough. Should we be thinking about a big strategic partnership too?" Robert leaned back in his chair, swirling his drink thoughtfully. "Rick, partnerships can certainly accelerate growth, but be careful. Don't get distracted by the shiny allure of big names. What you've got here is something valuable, a user base that trusts you, a platform that works, and most importantly, a team that knows how to adapt." He paused before continuing, his gaze steady. "But you've got to act quickly. If you can't match the competitor's pace in terms of partnerships or technology, then you need to double down on your strengths, personalization, community, and true value for the users. Make them your advocates." Rick considered this for a moment. "But won't that just slow us down against them?" "No," Robert said, locking eyes with him. "It'll set you apart. Make them fight for your users, not the other way around. You can't beat them at their game. You've got to change the rules." Rick smiled. Robert's advice wasn't what he had expected, but it made perfect sense. He left the lunch feeling energized and more confident in his decision to focus on strengthening their community, though he knew the road ahead was anything but easy. They were still up against a formidable adversary. But with the right strategy and the right team, Rick felt like they had the chance to come out on top. Rick woke up the next morning with a newfound sense of resolve. The lunch with Robert had given him the clarity he needed. It wasn't about trying to outrun the competition at their own game. It was about embracing what made them unique and using that as a weapon. Community, trust, and personalization. These were the things that could truly set them apart in the long run. He was determined to build something more than just a product. He was building a movement, a user-driven force that could not be easily duplicated. That afternoon, as Rick was in a team meeting strategizing the next phase of their user engagement initiative, an unexpected email arrived in his inbox. The subject line read, "Potential Partnership Opportunity. Let's talk?" Rick's eyes narrowed in suspicion. The email wasn't from any company he recognized, and the sender's name didn't ring any bells. But there was something about the tone of the message that caught his attention. It was brief but intriguing. "Hi, Rick. I've been following your company's growth over the past few months, and I think we might be able to help you with a partnership that could give you the resources to scale while staying true to what makes your platform special. Let's talk. Best, Jenna Hartwell, founder, Hartwell Ventures." Rick wasn't sure what to make of it. A potential partnership, but from someone he didn't know? He'd seen plenty of cold outreach from investors and potential collaborators, but this was different. The message didn't sound like the usual sales pitch. After a brief moment of hesitation, he hit reply. "Hi, Jenna. Thanks for reaching out. I'd be interested in learning more about your proposal. Let's set up a time to talk. Best regards, Rick Larson." Within the hour, Rick had a response, and they set up a call for later that day. The call with Jenna was everything Rick wasn't expecting, and more. Jenna was an experienced venture capitalist, but not the typical type. She had spent years working on the other side of the table, seeing firsthand what made a startup succeed or fail. But unlike the other investors Rick had interacted with in the past, she wasn't looking to just throw money at the company and expect instant returns. Instead, she seemed genuinely invested in their mission and long-term success. "I've been following your progress, Rick," Jenna began. "You've done some amazing work with the AI, and the market response has been strong. But I see something more, something bigger. You're building a platform that's not just about financial tools. You're creating a community of users who care about the platform and about helping each other grow. Rick felt a sense of validation in her words. That's exactly what we're trying to do. We want to be more than just another app. We're trying to create something that changes the way people think about managing their finances, something that's personalized and adaptable to each user's unique journey. Jenna's voice softened, her tone thoughtful. I see that. And I think it's exactly what's missing in the market. Everyone's so focused on features and partnerships, but you're focusing on the people behind the data. That's where the future is headed, Rick. But to get there, you need the right resources. You need the ability to scale faster, to provide more personalized experiences, and to outpace the competition. That's where I come in. Rick raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I'm offering you more than just capital, Jenna replied. I can connect you with key industry leaders, experts who specialize in community-driven growth and user engagement. I can help you forge partnerships that actually enhance your mission, not just some big-name corporation looking to throw their weight around. And most importantly, I can provide you with the strategic advice you need to stay ahead in a market that's evolving faster than anyone anticipated. Rick was intrigued. You're talking about a partnership that goes beyond funding? Exactly, Jenna said. I've been involved with several startups that have struggled to scale, not because their technology was lacking, but because they didn't have the right support at the right time. I can offer you the tools, the connections, and the expertise you need to make sure your platform doesn't just survive, but thrives. Rick felt his pulse quicken. This wasn't the typical conversation he had with investors. This felt like a potential game changer. Let's talk more, Rick said, his voice steady but filled with excitement. I'd love to hear what you have in mind. Over the following weeks, Rick and Jenna worked closely together, exploring ways to leverage her network and expertise. Jenna helped them secure several strategic partnerships, but none of them were with the typical big tech players. Instead, they focused on working with fintech influencers, expert advisors, and small but highly respected companies within the industry who could bring a more niche, but equally valuable, audience to their platform. With Jenna's help, they began hosting exclusive events for their most engaged users, giving them a seat at the table with some of the brightest minds in finance. They built a speaker series featuring thought leaders who were passionate about empowering users with the tools to make better financial decisions. They didn't just want to create a community. They wanted to create a space where every user felt like an active participant in the evolution of the platform. And as the months passed, Rick began to see the results of this unconventional partnership. User engagement was skyrocketing. People weren't just using the platform. They were becoming evangelists. They were sharing tips, offering feedback, and even connecting with one another to discuss their financial goals. The sense of community that Rick had hoped for was now becoming a reality. The competitive landscape was still intense, but now, Rick felt he was no longer fighting to stay ahead simply through technology or marketing. He was building a brand that people cared about, a brand that aligned with their values and ambitions. It wasn't just about features. It was about a shared vision of financial empowerment. But despite this progress, Rick couldn't forget the looming shadow of the rival competitor, who was still scaling at an alarming rate. He knew that they couldn't rest on their laurels, no matter how strong their community had become. There was still more work to do, more to prove. But for the first time in months, Rick felt hopeful. He had a team behind him, a network of invaluable partners, and an engaged user base that was growing by the day. More importantly, he had Jenna, someone who truly understood the value of building something sustainable. It was time to push even harder. It had been several months since Rick partnered with Jenna, and their platform had never been stronger. The user base had grown exponentially, and the community engagement was unlike anything they had seen before. The personalized touch they had integrated into the platform had set them apart, and users were not only loyal, they were excited about the future. But despite their success, Rick couldn't ignore the constant undercurrent of pressure. The competitor, who had once seemed like a distant threat, was now becoming a formidable adversary. Their sleek marketing campaigns were hard to ignore, and their recent string of high-profile partnerships had the potential to change the game entirely. Rick knew the time had come to make a bold move, one that would put them at the forefront of the industry for good. The day started like any other, with the team gathered in the conference room for their weekly update. Rick sat at the head of the table, looking around at the familiar faces. The team had grown over the past few months, and each person had played a crucial role in the platform's evolution. David, Carla, and the rest of the leadership team were all present, as well as Jenna, who had become a trusted advisor, almost like a co-leader in some respects. Rick cleared his throat. All right, team. I think we all know where we stand. We've made tremendous progress. Our platform is better than ever, our users are more engaged than ever, and our brand is stronger than ever. But we all know the competition isn't backing off. They're coming for us, and we can't afford to just sit back and hope that things will work out. David nodded, glancing at the others. So, what's the next move? We can't just rely on our community forever. We need to make a big splash, something that will change the narrative. Carla spoke up, her voice confident. What if we do something completely unexpected? Not just a feature update, but a total game changer. Something that no one sees coming. What if we create something that forces the competition to react, not just follow? Rick felt a spark of excitement at the idea. What are you thinking, Carla? She grinned. What if we launch an entirely new product, something that extends our current platform but goes into a completely different space? We've been talking about adding more value to our users, and what if we tap into something that isn't just about finance, but the way people live their lives every day? Something that ties our mission of empowerment to something bigger. Rick leaned forward, intrigued. Go on. We're already creating personalized financial experiences, Carla continued. But what if we could help our users make decisions in every area of their life, not just their money? What if we could give them a product that offers the same level of customization and personalization, but for their health, career, and personal growth? The room fell silent as everyone processed the idea. Rick felt his mind racing. It wasn't just a financial platform. It was a holistic approach to a person's life, helping them become their best selves in all areas, not just their bank account. It was a bold idea, a revolutionary one. David, always the skeptic, raised an eyebrow. It's risky, but it could be the disruption we need. We'd be changing the game again, but we'd need to move fast. Rick's heart started to beat faster as he envisioned it. If we do this right, we wouldn't just be a financial platform anymore. We'd be a lifestyle brand, a true partner in our users' lives, a brand they can rely on for all aspects of their journey. But we'd have to launch it with a bang. Jenna, who had been listening intently, spoke up. I like where this is going, but let's be real. We don't just need to create something groundbreaking. We need to make sure the market knows it's coming. We need to build anticipation, get press coverage, and create a movement around it. We don't just want users. We want advocates who can't stop talking about this new direction. Rick looked around the room, a sense of excitement building inside him. Let's do it. Let's make this the moment that defines us as a brand. We're not just responding to the competition. We're going to lead the charge. For the next few weeks, Rick and the team worked around the clock to bring their bold vision to life. They built an entirely new feature for the platform, an all-encompassing tool that combined financial insights with health, career, and personal growth goals. It wasn't just a product. It was a complete lifestyle companion that would help users optimize every aspect of their lives. But as they prepared to launch, the pressure intensified. The competitor, who had once been a secondary concern, was now reacting to their every move. Word had gotten out that Rick's platform was about to release something big, and the rival company was pushing out a major update of their own in response. Rick knew they had to stay ahead of the curve. The launch had to be perfect. Finally, the day arrived. It was a crisp Monday morning, and the team had prepared everything down to the smallest detail. The new feature, dubbed LifeSync, would be unveiled to the world with a high-energy marketing campaign and an exclusive live event that would showcase how the platform's new capabilities could transform users' lives. As the countdown clock ticked down to launch, Rick stood backstage, watching the monitors in the control room. His heart raced, his mind replaying every step that had brought them here. They were about to disrupt everything. He knew it. Ready when you are, Jenna said, standing beside him, her eyes sharp with focus. Rick nodded. Let's make history. The live event kicked off with a bang. The platform's new capabilities were presented with a stunning visual presentation that showcased just how seamlessly LifeSync integrated into every user's world. The campaign didn't just highlight new features, it positioned Rick's platform as a lifestyle change, not just a financial tool. The response was immediate. Users flooded social media, eager to try out the new features. Influencers across the industry began sharing their excitement about how LifeSync could improve their daily routines and financial well-being. It wasn't just a financial app anymore. It was a revolution. And the competition? They quickly responded with their own announcement, another new feature that, while impressive, didn't hold a candle to the comprehensive, lifestyle-focused approach that Rick's team had just unveiled. Rick watched the numbers skyrocket in real time as engagement reached new heights. They had done it. They had built something truly transformative. But as the day came to a close, Rick knew this was just the beginning. They had shaken the market, but now they needed to sustain the momentum, prove that their vision was more than just a moment in time. They had to follow through. Rick looked at the team gathered around him, a grin spreading across his face. The competition had no idea what was coming next. Rick and his team basked in the excitement of their successful launch. LifeSync was a hit, and the response from users and the market was overwhelmingly positive. Their competitors were scrambling to catch up, but it was clear. Rick's platform had just set the bar for what the future of tech-driven lifestyle tools could look like. The momentum was real, and it seemed like nothing could stop them now. But just as Rick was starting to feel the thrill of success, an unexpected twist threw everything into chaos. It was a typical Tuesday afternoon when Rick received the email. At first, it seemed like just another press inquiry or partnership offer. But as Rick read through it, his stomach sank. The email came from a well-known journalist with a major tech publication. The subject line read, "Exclusive. Allegations against Rick Larson's startup." Rick's heart raced as he clicked open the message. It contained a detailed accusation about one of their most prominent early investors, a name Rick had trusted for years. The email claimed that this investor had been involved in a series of unethical business practices long before he had joined their startup, including exploiting insider information and unethical behavior in previous ventures. The journalist had already gathered a substantial amount of evidence, and they were threatening to publish the story unless Rick made a public statement. Rick's hands trembled as he read the email again. He knew the allegations weren't true, but the journalist's words made it clear that if this story went public, it would have a devastating effect on the company's reputation. How could this happen now? Rick muttered to himself, feeling the weight of the news. LifeSync was just gaining traction, and now this? His mind raced as he tried to think through the best course of action. He immediately called a meeting with his leadership team. When they gathered in the conference room, Rick was visibly shaken, but he tried to maintain control. "I've just received an email," Rick began, looking around at his trusted colleagues. "We're being accused of being involved with an investor who has a questionable past. The journalist already has enough evidence to publish a damaging story, and we need to decide how to respond." David leaned forward, his face serious. "This is a major problem, Rick. We can't afford to let this kind of accusation hang over us, especially with all the success we're seeing. If this story goes public, it could tarnish everything we've worked for." Carla, ever the strategist, spoke up. "We need to move fast. This could be the kind of story that can spiral out of control if we don't handle it carefully. We need to reach out to the journalist first, before they publish, and offer our side of the story. We can't let them paint us as part of this mess." Rick nodded, but the weight of the situation was clear. "I've worked hard to build this company on integrity. I need to make sure everyone knows that we had no idea about this investor's past, and we have no part in any of this unethical behavior." But even as Rick spoke those words, he couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. How had this happened? How had someone he trusted become the potential catalyst for the downfall of everything they had worked for? The next few days were a blur of phone calls, legal consultations, and crisis management. Jenna, ever the calm and collected partner, worked alongside Rick to craft the perfect response, making sure they handled the situation with transparency and professionalism. They reached out to the journalist, offering to meet and provide more details about their side of the story. The journalist was skeptical but agreed to give Rick a chance to respond. "I know this is a tough position to be in, Rick," Jenna said as they prepared for the meeting with the journalist. "But what's most important now is that we control the narrative. If we let them make us look guilty, we're going to lose everything. Rick took a deep breath, determined to do whatever it took to protect his company. I know. I've got to do what's right, no matter how hard it is. The meeting with the journalist was tense, but Rick was able to present the facts clearly. He explained how they had conducted extensive due diligence on all of their investors, including the one who was now under scrutiny. He reiterated that they had never been aware of the investors' past actions, and that they had always conducted themselves with integrity. We have no reason to believe that this investor has acted inappropriately with our company, Rick said during the meeting. We've always prioritized transparency and ethics in everything we do. We're a company built on trust, both with our users and with our investors. The journalist listened intently, taking notes. There was a long silence before they responded. Look, Rick, the journalist said, I'm just doing my job. We've got a lot of evidence that suggests there's more to the story, but I'll give you some time. If you want to offer any additional comments or provide further context, I'll let you know before we publish anything. Rick felt a small sense of relief. At least they hadn't published yet. But as he left the meeting, he knew the damage had already been done. The allegations were out in the open, and now, it was a race against time to repair the company's image before the press picked it up. Over the next few days, Rick and his team worked tirelessly to issue a public statement, engaging with both the media and their user base. They reaffirmed their commitment to ethical practices and announced that they were conducting a full investigation into the investors' past actions, despite having no knowledge of any wrongdoing. To his surprise, the response from their user base was overwhelmingly supportive. Many of their loyal users expressed their confidence in the platform and its leadership, with several public figures vowing to stand by the company. The press, however, wasn't as kind. The story was picked up by several major outlets, but the narrative had shifted. Rather than painting Rick and his team as complicit, the story focused more on the uncertainty of the situation. The headline became less about the allegations and more about the challenges facing the company as they dealt with the controversy. The relief Rick felt was short-lived, but he knew that this was a defining moment. How they handled this crisis would determine the company's future. The weeks following the crisis were marked by intense scrutiny, but Rick's team held strong. They doubled down on their commitment to transparency, and through careful PR strategies, they managed to shift the narrative back toward their mission, building a better future for their users. They weren't out of the woods yet, but they had learned a valuable lesson in resilience. Sometimes, it wasn't the challenges that defined you, but how you responded to them. And Rick knew this. The company wasn't just about technology or finances. It was about trust. And no matter what happened, they were going to earn that trust back, one step at a time. The days after the crisis had passed were some of the most difficult Rick had ever faced. The media storm had subsided, but the shadows of the allegations still loomed large over his company. Trust had been shaken, not just with the public, but within the team. While many of their loyal users had stood by them, the internal pressure was palpable. Yet Rick was determined to emerge from this stronger than ever. They had faced the fire, and they had survived. But now, it was time to rise. Rick sat in his office late one evening, staring at his computer screen. The numbers were improving, but there was still a long way to go. The platform had weathered the storm, but the team needed something more, a vision, a sense of purpose that would guide them through the next phase of their growth. A knock on the door broke his concentration. Jenna stepped in, carrying a file folder in her hands. "You've been working late," she remarked, walking toward his desk. "How are you holding up?" As the months passed, the company's growth accelerated. The user base expanded, and new investors took notice. LifeSync had become a household name, not just in the tech world, but in the daily lives of everyday people who were looking for more than just financial security. They were looking for a way to live better. But even as the company's success continued to rise, Rick never lost sight of what had gotten them here in the first place. Their commitment to trust, transparency, and most importantly, their users. It was that commitment that had helped them weather the storm. And it was that same commitment that would drive them forward as they continued to innovate and grow. Rick stood in front of the team at their annual company retreat, feeling a deep sense of pride. He looked out at the faces of the people who had stood by him through the darkest times and helped bring LifeSync to where it was today. "I want to thank all of you for your dedication and hard work," Rick said, his voice steady. "We've been through a lot together, but today, I'm more confident than ever in our future. This is just the beginning. We've built something incredible, but now, it's time to build something even bigger." The team erupted into applause. Rick could see the excitement in their eyes, the belief that the future was theirs for the taking. Together, they had made it through the toughest challenges, and together, they would continue to forge ahead, always striving for more. The journey was far from over, but Rick was ready. With his team, his vision, and the lessons learned from every setback, they would continue to push boundaries, redefine industries, and change lives. The platform wasn't just about technology, it was about people. And as long as they stayed true to that mission, Rick knew that LifeSync would continue to thrive. As Rick walked out of the meeting, he felt the weight of everything they had accomplished and everything that still lay ahead. The world was changing, and they were leading the charge. For Rick, this was more than just business. It was a purpose, and he was only just getting started. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?